Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Laprie.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, episode number 4. Hey, thanks for coming and hanging out again today. I seriously appreciate it, as always. I'm your host, Kim Laprie from teachersneedteachers.com, which is a coaching site and a community site for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today is the second part of a 4-part series that I'm doing on reflecting at the end of the school year. We discussed classroom setup and looking at how we have it set up now and how we can optimize it for not only students, but also traffic and getting around. And today we're going to be discussing a big one, which is grading. Now, grading is kind of a personal and sometimes contentious topic, and a lot of people don't necessarily like to talk about it, but it's something that we need to definitely examine regularly, particularly if you are a new teacher. So I wanted to go into more about what to think about when you decide on your grading policies and not so much preach about what I think you should do. If you haven't already, I have a link in the show notes to a resource that I created that you can follow along with while you're listening to this podcast. You can go ahead and head over there now and you can download it, and then you can fill it out while you're listening, or you can just do this later on your own. Either way, but it's really handy in terms of knowing what to think about as you're reflecting on this past school year. All right, let's get started. So when we think about grading, the first thing that we want to do is think about the purpose of grades or assessment in general. Grades are really meant to communicate how a student is progressing academically. It communicates different things to different people. For example, parents just want to know how they're doing in your class. It's usually just a matter of, are they getting an A? Are they getting a B? Are they behaving? Are they doing their work? Unless the parent is an educator, they're most likely just concerned about that. For students, they want to know, are they meeting the standard in terms of, are they doing the work right? Are they doing enough to get a good grade or to pass? Counselors and even administrators are concerned about, are the students' needs being met? So a counselor might look at a student's grades and at their home life and decide that they need to include some interventions to help them be more successful. And then we have higher education, and they're looking at whether or not a student is going to be successful in college, whether or not they can handle the rigors of college. Grades are supposed to communicate student progress, but a lot of times our grades don't do that. Our grades reflect effort, or they reflect good time management. And from looking at some people's grades, you can't even tell how a student is progressing. So that's something that we wanted to look at today. If you're looking at the resource that I provided, there's a section that says student work and grading, and that's what I'm going to be covering. For secondary teachers, meaning middle and high school, a lot of times in our grade books, we weight grades, meaning certain assignments have more prominence than others in our grade book. Some teachers have more emphasis on homework. Other teachers give more emphasis on tests and maybe classwork or projects. So that's something that you want to think about. What is the most important to you? Which of these categories, homework, tests, classwork, and projects, really reflect student learning for you? For me personally, in terms of classwork, it's not really that much in terms of weight, because if it's something that we did together, or if it's something that I worked with them on it, or they did it in groups, I can't really assess how they did because I don't know if it's based on them just copying me or if they were able to do it on their own. So classwork is actually worth very little in terms of weight in their grade. For homework, it's a similar thing because I can't control what happens when they leave my classroom. So I don't know if someone helped them with their homework. And students who have parents who are at home and who understand the homework, they have an unfair advantage over the students whose parents aren't really home because they're working or they're just not around. So I don't really put an emphasis on homework. They'll get credit for doing it, but it doesn't carry that much weight in my grade book. Now with tests, Some students are bad test takers and they could do really well in all the other assignments and projects, and they take a test and they bomb it. I know I was personally a bad test taker, but at the same time, those types of assessments, the quizzes and tests, they can really tell us whether or not students are understanding the concept and whether or not we need to reteach. So that's kind of a personal one for you. And then finally, there's the projects. And in my class, those projects also include essays. That's individual work in general. And so for me, that tends to have more weight because they're really showing me what they can do. So those are just some things to think about in terms of emphasis. Now, I have to give kudos to elementary school teachers because they have this down. They have the system down in terms of grading students based on how they're performing on certain skills and standards. In fact, it was because of my daughter going to elementary school and getting her report card each grading period that I realized that I wanted to do something similar where my gradebook reflected what students could and could not do. So not only does it communicate to the parents how the student is doing, it's also easier for me to track how a student has been progressing over time. That's just something that you can think about too. I don't know what type of a gradebook that your particular school or district uses. Some schools require you to use something, while others you're just kind of on your own. Now, another point of contention with grading has to do with late work. I have seen so many heated debates on different Facebook groups about late work. So let's dive into that. Now, there's two camps. There's people who either don't accept late work or there's a significant penalty for late work. And then there's others who say that we're not grading them based on time management skills. And I can see both. So on the one hand, the ones who want to grade them in a way where they're penalized or they don't get credit, their thinking is that students need to learn responsibility. While on the other side, the ones who think that it's not based on time management, this is actually also true because let's think about students in middle school. They go from having one, maybe two teachers to having 6 or 7, and it's really hard for them to stay organized. Can we feel good about penalizing them for not knowing how to stay organized and for not having those skills when maybe we haven't even explicitly taught them? Is it fair if they don't have someone at home to help them stay on top of their homework and make sure that it gets done on time? That's something that you're going to want to dig deep and really think about. I don't know if your school actually requires you to count late work and to penalize students or if it's completely up to you. But you do want to do some soul searching on this one because penalizing students for late work can really, really dig them into a hole. I've seen it to the point where students are so far into the red in terms of their grade that they see no point in even trying to bring it up at all. So that's something to think about. Another point of consideration, your grading policies. So if you're looking at the list, this includes late work, partial completion, meaning they didn't do all of it, but they did some or most of it, test retakes or assignment redos, extra credit, absences, and cheating. So let's go through these. I already mentioned late work. You're going to want to think about your late work policy and have it really spelled out, especially at the beginning of the school year. Parents are going to want to know what your late work policy is, so you really want to spell it out in very, very clear terms. Same thing with partial completion. Are you going to give a student a 0 for not completing it, even if they did demonstrate some learning in an assignment? So for tests, do you offer study guides? I know that some teachers, because they offer a very thorough study guide, they don't offer test retakes. So are you going to offer an opportunity for students to retake it? If so, will there be criteria? I know that some teachers, if you're going to retake a quiz or a test, you have to do some other form of work to prove that you've looked at your answers, that you've really tried to learn so that when you retake it, you're not just guessing again. You actually took the time, figure out what you did wrong, practice it so you don't do it wrong again. And same for assignment redos. Are you going to allow them to rewrite an essay if they didn't get a score that they liked, or rewrite a science lab? Now, how about extra credit? That's something that I see a lot of memes on the internet about where students are asking for extra credit. And the joke goes, why would I give you extra credit if you didn't even do the assignments the first time? And there's a lot of validity in that if you think about it. A lot of times you'll find students who didn't even do the original assignment, but they're coming to you 1 week before the end of the grading period asking for extra credit so they can bring their grade up. For me, when they do that, I tell them, no, I don't offer extra credit, but hey, you're more than welcome to do the assignments that I actually did assign. Unfortunately, a lot of times they don't take me up on that for whatever strange reason. They'd just rather do the extra credit. So that's something that you want to think about. And how about absences? How much time do you give them when they're absent in terms of when they can make it up? Do they have to come to tutoring to get that lesson from you? What is involved in terms of making it work when they were absent? And finally, cheating. Now, this one is kind of a big one because students will do it, and a lot of times when they're caught, their parents get defensive and don't believe it. So, 2 things to consider. Number 1, what is your school's policy on cheating? A lot of schools have an academic honesty policy, and that's something that you want to find out now, and you want to put that in your syllabus for the beginning of the school year. You want to let parents know ahead of time what the policy is if someone is cheating. For some schools, the policy is they get a 0 on the assignment, and the person they were cheating off of also gets a 0 on the assignment. And some other schools have harsher penalties than that. Now, you may have your own policy for cheating where they have to completely redo the assignment or do an extra assignment or serve detention. Either way, be really, really clear on what your particular policies and the school policies are and communicate those to parents. Now, a lot of times parents like to contest grades. You're going to find this happening all throughout your teaching career. The best way to keep these parents happy, or at least keep them at bay, is to be very specific about your grading policy, but also be reasonable. There's fair versus equal, but we have to consider that if a student was out with a major injury and they missed your class and they didn't do the assignments, you're going to want to give them some leeway in terms of making up that work. In fact, you might even have a school policy that dictates how much time they have in terms of making it up. Or some students have something like an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, that dictates that they have extra time to complete an assignment. Now, an IEP is a legally binding document, so you actually have to give them that extra time by law. And I know that some parents have even tried to sue schools for not following an IEP. So that's something that you want to stay on top of and check for students in your classes that have IEPs and look for their accommodations. A lot of times one of their accommodations involves extra time on work. And overall, when we're thinking about grades, we want to think about what is communicating a student's academic performance. Are your policies about punishing kids? Are your policies about, I'll show them, I'll give them a bad grade? Or are your policies about teaching kids responsibility? Or is it about progress and learning? So these are things that you want to consider when you're coming up with your grading policies. Some school districts like mine, teachers pretty much have complete autonomy with their grading. But I still think that we need to consider what's actually best for the students and not necessarily what's easiest for us. If you want parents to be involved, if you want a student to get the right interventions, your gradebook and all of your grades need to communicate how a student is doing. And I know I keep repeating myself by saying that, but it's just really important that what we're doing in our classroom is student-centered and is focused on learning. So if you have any questions on grading, I'm going to include a link to a blog post that I wrote about grading your gradebook, which is pretty much this process that we're doing, and also elaborating on these points that I discussed today. And also, I encourage you to have these conversations with your administrator, with your colleagues, and actually pick the brains of teachers that teach other grades or other subjects and see what their grading policies are. You'd be surprised how it varies, and it might open your eyes to differing opinions. So I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. I hope you like this series so far. I know that with 2 more episodes, I'm just really hoping that you're getting a lot of value out of this. If you do like this show and you want to look at the show notes or you want to know more, you can go to teachersneedteachers.com/4. And also, if you like the show, I would love to know what you think. If you could please head over to Apple Podcasts and rate the show and leave a review, I'd really appreciate it. Not only does it give me feedback on how I'm doing, It helps this podcast become more discoverable to teachers who could really use this information. And as always, if you have any suggestions for the show, or if you are interested in being a guest, please email me at kim@teachersneedteachers.com. Have a fabulous day.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.